Welcome to The Landscape, a podcast to shed light on the people, programs, and businesses that are changing the landscape for individuals with any type of disability. I'm your host, Nave Eldar. Today you will hear a blunt and insightful conversation with Emma Johnson, a self-advocate and peer who has over 2 decades of recovery from the dual diagnosis of major depression and alcohol addiction. We joined the conversation with Emma speaking about the first person who discovered she was having suicidal ideations.
My major depression was identified by my neuropsychiatrist. I was diagnosed with epilepsy as a child, and for a long time, my parents treated the epilepsy seizures because they were petit mal seizures, not grand mal seizures, so they were much less common, and what it looked like that I would space out or just lose my focus, and so they thought it was behavioral, that I really had some kind of control over what I was doing. And how I like to think of myself is, long before they had the diagnosis, conduct disorder, I'm the reason why they have it. Okay. So my parents weren't bad parents. They were just used to me acting out, and they thought that the epilepsy was a further proof of me acting out.
And we should probably say, what year was this? Because I think that impacts the story.
Oh, really? Now you want to do
not exactly the year, but
okay.
What
so this would have been in the 60s. In the 60s, in late 60s. This would be late 60s. But I had been for years having the seizures.
Okay.
And so they affected me. Like, I withdrew because I knew that I wasn't acting out, and I couldn't determine when I was going to have one. And so that made me withdraw from wanting to, like, I was Sunday school secretary. I didn't want to speak in front of people because I never knew when I was going to have a seizure. But anyway, the neuropsychiatrist, Dr. Lamb, in the late 60s, diagnosed me with petit mal epilepsy. And while I was talking to him, in his office, I grew up in southern Illinois, a little place called Mount Vernon in the cornfields of Illinois. But Dr. Lamb's office was in St. Louis. So I got to go to the big city, and I got to talk to this man who was very knowledgeable. And he found out that I was suicidal. And I had been also suicidal from probably kindergarten. And I went to school in the 60s. I started kindergarten in 1960. So
and how did he find that out? Like,
in my ramblings, in talking to me, and in the testing. So it was tests and talking, because in my home, they say you need to be seen and not heard, but actually you need to be not seen and not heard. Mm-hmm. And so I was very shut down. I was very closed off, and I already, by this time, 11, 12, preteen, very suicidal, very afraid to be me, just living in fear, and what seems to be a lot of pressure to conform to something I don't want to conform to. And that's the idea of what a young Black girl who is coming into her womanhood should be.
Mm-hmm. How did your family respond to the doctor telling her that their
Well,
daughter
they were
was suicidal?
relieved.
Okay.
They were relieved to find out that there was something. And how he got a hold of me was through Easter Seals. Easter Seals came through, did their work at the school. Somehow I got in, and that's how I was diagnosed.
And so did you get treatment at that time?
I got treatment.
And what was that?
And I think it was Dilantin. I was on Dilantin for a long time, which was, I don't hear much about that anymore, I think what the medications I remember were Dilantin and Darvon.
Okay. Then what happened? What happens
Well,
next?
Dr. Lamb made me understand in a very real sense that I had to find my voice. And so then I started writing and drawing and just writing my thoughts out, because it still wasn't safe for me to express my thoughts, because I got a lot of beatings when I was little. Growing up in my home, I was the one. There was my brother who is 18 months younger than me, but he got, rarely did he get a spanking, whipping, beating, but mostly mine were beatings, because it was something about my personality and my mother that didn't jihad. That we didn't. It's something about my personality that sent my mother just in flames. And so, yeah. And she mostly changed my behavior through physical force, and that was with the strap or switch or maybe the back of her hand. One time she hit me in the head with her best chicken frying pan, and then it dented the bottom because it's shaped like my head. And she was so distraught. It wasn't the fact that she had conked me in the head, it could have knocked me out, that made her upset. It was the fact that she lost her good chicken frying pan.
Wow. And so what age, because part of your story too is alcoholism. So what age did you turn to that?
I had my first drink at 16, Nave. I remember my girlfriend and I, we had made us some new hot pants. That's back in the day. Hot pants. And then, of course, we had put our ages up. And this is a tiny town, and everybody knows everybody. But why we thought we could get away with the lie is beyond me, but I'm addicted to fantasy. That's what I learned, that long before I took my first drink, it was not okay for me to tell the truth. So somehow I got addicted to fantasy. So I'm pretending to be someone else other than who I am. So I was 18 or 19, whatever lie I told them. They had beer. Of course, I wasn't used to drinking beer, but of course, as an adult, that's what adults do, and I wanted to do it. And I liked the attention that the guys were giving us. And they were in their 20s. They'd been to Vietnam and coming back from Vietnam. And while they were wanting the attention of young girls, now I know that they had a little bit of a problem. There's something wrong with that, but then I didn't think so. So I had my first drink, and it made me say, aha. For the first time. For the first time, it was okay to be me in my own skin.
So it kind of dropped your inhibitions and opened you up, because you had always been closed?
I had always been closed, and it was like waiting to exhale, that the world suddenly became a little bit kinder. This is how I normally talk about it, is I became Cinderella in the ghetto.
Okay.
And I was not only Cinderella, I was all of the characters in the all at the same time. So I was feeling no pain, and the experience, the change in my behavior and my personality was so overwhelming. I knew something was wrong with that. And I said, well, I will never drink again. But of course, I drank at my very next opportunity.
Yeah, just you describing it like that sounds very addictive, right? It's like you said, I've lived this life of where I feel small and controlled and beaten down, and I don't speak that much, and now all of a sudden I feel like I'm in the middle of a fairy tale. Right, like in every character of the fairy tale.
And then my friend, I noticed we just had one beer. In my recollection, it was just one can of beer, and she wasn't drinking hers as fast as I drank mine, because Emma, straight pipeline, guzzled hers. And also, at the same time of feeling like a princess and the king and queen and the little mice men, I've also felt like a grizzly bear because I wanted to take my friend's beer and I wanted to slash her throat.
Wow.
And so what I know is those extremes
Right.
indicate that I have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Right away.
Right away. Right away. And so by the time I came into a 12-step, my first 12-step meeting and saying that I had a problem, it was 21 years later. But I had already been alcoholic by definition from my first drink, though I didn't know it.
Now, did it take you 21 years to realize it, or did it take you 21 years just to get help?
Took me 21 years to get help, but I came in thinking that I was an addict, and that is somewhat different than an alcoholic, because my thoughts about an alcoholic were an old white male in a long overcoat drinking out of a paper sack around a fire barrel. I was not that. So my very own bias played its part in keeping me diseased, which is ill at ease, for so much longer than I had to.
In this whole time, were you still taking antidepressants?
I didn't take antidepressants. My antidepressant, if that Dilantin, if that was it, that's what I took. I had never taken antidepressants. I didn't get formally diagnosed with depression until I was 37, and that's when I was diagnosed as co-occurring at 37. And so this is from 16 to 37, that's 21 years.
Yeah.
And so I treated it with alcohol, various drugs, but my drug of choice was cocaine, which is me treating my depression.
Right. Trying to lift yourself back up, your mood back up. And so how did that impact your life at that time? I mean, that's a long time. And I know you have kids, but I assume you had kids at that time. And so did it impact your work, your motherhood? What was it?
It wasn't anything or any place it didn't impact. I'm a binger, so I don't use every day. But when I use, Katie barred the door, something outside of me has to stop me. That means I run out and there's none to be found, because I will turn over every rock and nook and cranny looking for it. And if you have it, you're going to give it to me. I get arrested. So I'm a criminologist by education, but I also have a criminal mindset. So that also played a part in that. I look back at my parenting of my daughter. I'm a mother. I have a daughter and an only child, and she has paid the highest price for my lack of parenting skills, my co-occurring disorder. She's paid the highest price for that because she could see it. She lived with it up close and personal. She knew more about me than I knew about myself.
And if I can ask, what's your relationship like today?
Recovery has mended and given us a relationship.
Okay, good. And so what made you 21 years later go get treatment? What was the tipping point?
Because I had come to the end of all I knew. All that time, I had my daughter in college, so I went against the odds. I was able to finish and get my degree. I have a bachelor's degree in criminology. I was able to finish that and work. And I worked in non-traditional female fields, so I was in male roles. So I worked in security for a long time. I went into Tennessee Valley Authority, and I worked in the powerhouse, made electricity, so I understand those whole systems. And I think that the universe just wove my life together because I was always on the verge of coming unhinged. But at 37, it's when my daughter was no longer enough to keep me alive. See, she had been enough. And then none of the reasons that I had for staying alive. It's like I outgrew them all, and there I was. My life was death.
Right.
And I didn't know about recovery because in all of that I had been shielded from it. So my community didn't know about recovery, but I knew a little bit about it. But the people who went, my friends who had my same problem, like the girl that I talked about when I shared my first drink, she went to rehab before I did, but she used in rehabs, she didn't change.
Right.
Our other friends that went, they didn't change. So I saw no recovery from this. So I thought that my only option was to die. And so I came to the point where I had to die because I could no longer live like I was living. Mm-hmm.
And so did somebody talk to you into going, or you're just like, this is my
drug dealer
last
took
effort?
me to treatment.
Did he?
Right.
Wow.
My treatment center is not too far from here, which is Parthenon Pavilion, which is down the street. And he took me from the local drug house to Parthenon Pavilion, signed me in because I had been up for days. This was this was on my 37th birthday, and I had went out for my 37th birthday. It had turned into a spree or a binge.
Right.
So I was probably out 3 or 4 days. I don't remember. But I know that I had been out for a long time and I've been smoking cocaine because I was looking real, real ashy. When I started to come down, I noticed my skin. And I looked like Michael Jackson. You see how brown I am. And I looked like Michael Jackson, the later Michael Jackson, without his makeup.
Right.
And I know that, crack will take your skin color. I'm telling you, it'll do something to you. But yeah, but it's a wonder that I had even lived through what I've lived through.
Well, I mean, you had to be in some pretty bad shape for your drug dealer to drop you off. I mean, he must have thought like you're going to die if you keep this up, right?
Right.
So
I was a good customer.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so a part of recovery is relapse for many people. So did you experience that, or were you?
My relapse was one hit off one joint. And what I tell young women who are seeking the 12-step way of life is that we cannot keep doing the same things that we do. In my addiction, in recovery, I can't do those same behaviors because those behaviors will lead me back. So they say stay away from old playgrounds and playmates. And of course, I had that information, but I thought somehow I was different. And so I was about 5 or 6 months sober. I had gone to visit the town of my birth, which is in Kentucky, and I had been in a long-term extramarital affair with a man, and I wanted to be with him and hang out with him. And the funny part of it is that his cousin had a liquor store, and we would hang out in the liquor store, and there I was hanging out with the people. They were getting high and drinking what we normally do, and so I'm actually volunteering in the liquor store selling liquor while thinking I'm in recovery, thinking my recovery looks that good, that it's going to somehow change them. But what it did was almost change me, because that was the trial by fire. So am I going to completely let go of my old way of life and try this new way? And that was the turning point.
And you haven't looked back since?
I haven't looked back.
That is amazing.
One hit off one joint, and I can inhale with the best of them. But that time I was blowing out. I heard things, like I had a spiritual experience, and like what are you doing? Like, it almost busted my eardrums. I'm in a club. I'm talking to myself, which I'm really talking to God or the Creator, because it had just spoken to me. Like, and then I'm like, how did I get to this point? But I ran out and got me something to eat. And they say, halt. Don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, which is halt. And I'm doing halt. Yeah. Check, check, check. I'm all of those things. I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I went to the Awful Waffle, got something to eat, went to my hotel. And what happened was I got into the 12-step program. So it really wasn't about him. It was about me. And what I was going to do was I going to actually try this way of life, this being abstinent, this following spiritual principles? Was I really going to try that, or was I going to be on the fence and see hanging on the fence will get you drunk? And let me tell you, at that time when my drug dealer took me to treatment, that was the first time I had been treated for depression. That's when at 37. That's when the antidepressants came into my life.
Okay. And I imagine that had a huge impact.
Right.
Right. And so I know you as a person who it's important for you to share and to help, right?
Yeah.
And so I was telling your husband that I had invited you to present at a conference, and you did a piece on self-stigma, and then we had a doctor there who did a piece on stigma. And for the listeners, I want to tell the doctor's story real quick, because a lot of times we don't think we have stigma, right? And so we were at an award ceremony, and our program that I was over had won an award from the National Association for Mentally Ill. And so we're all feeling good about ourselves. And he gets up and he won Advocate of the Year. And he looked at everybody and he said during his speech, and he was like, I just want everybody in this room to know that you have stigma. And of course we're offended, right? We're like, we're winning awards out here. What are you talking about? We have stigma. And so he said, let me give you an example. He said, my granddaughter, she tried to commit suicide last year and she had to go into the psych hospital. He said, when I went to work the next day, how many people do you think I told that my granddaughter's in the psychiatric hospital? And we all looked at him and we all knew the answer was 0. And then he said, if my granddaughter had broken her arms and legs on a ski trip, how many people would I have told at work? And we knew the answer was everybody. And everybody sat there and understood that, and it dawned on us how much stigma we had. And then you talked about self-stigma, though. So can you talk a little bit with us about how people with a mental health diagnosis or dual diagnosis have stigma towards themselves?
Well, I think we will start off with bias, and we start off with prejudice. And so how many old ideas and how many, how do I want to put this? How many unreasonable opinions do I have? And see, in my mind, it just gives me information. It never asks, it never inventories itself. It never questions what bizarre piece of information is given me. And so in my life, I would just act on the information my mind gave me. And so this bias and this prejudice, this unreasoned opinions, which can be acted on, and sometimes they're acted on for a long time, they become tradition. But they were lies in their formation.
Right.
And so that's what I think about stigma, is that it's deeply rooted. I do a lot of work around neglect. And you cannot become an addict or an alcoholic without an overwhelming measure of neglect. Okay? And so when we come into recovery, we're talking about care. And when we get treatment, it's about self-care. And but the two opposing, neglect and care. And so when I go back and I do the inventory work, so much of my life has been around neglect. When I did the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Event Study, and I scored very high.
Yes, I took that as well, yes.
I scored very high, and what I didn't realize is that I had been affected by trauma. And so what was trauma? What is stigma? What's prejudice? What's racism? Are everyday occurrences in my life. And so in my life, it was not okay for you to ask for help. And it's a two-part process. We ask for help, and then we have to receive the help in the way that it's given. So sometimes I ask for help, and then I shut down the reception of the help. And then sometimes I just don't like the help in the form that it's given, and so I won't take it.
Right.
Or I won't even seek it. And so that's what happens a lot, and that's what I see in addiction. This overwhelming neglect and all kinds of behaviors that support neglect, and then this resistance to be able to ask for help and receive the help in the way that it shows up.
And I know you were also a peer specialist, right? So you literally got a job that your function was to help other people that had a dual diagnosis, right? That was the population that you worked with to be successful in their recovery. Right. So how challenging was that for you, or how fulfilling was that for you?
Oh, it was very fulfilling because I think I owe it back because someone had to help me. And so in Parthenon Pavilion, which is the one of the local mental health hospitals, and I was on the dual diagnosis floor, which I think helped me because it actually, for the first time in my life, treated both the substance use and the mental health disorder. And if I had not gotten that, what I saw from my friends in recovery who went to local treatment centers and they dealt with the substance use and they got clean from their substance use, later on, maybe 10 years sober or somewhere down the road, that mental health issue comes up. So it's sort of like whack-a-mole. You get it, you treat it here and it goes down, but then it pops up somewhere else. And
exactly.
But being a peer specialist didn't require me to have any other knowledge than my own lived experience. And that's one of and I believe in peer specialists. I believe that we have to have role models so we can see that this recovery is possible. And so right now I am 27 years without a drink or a drug, and it's been 27 years since I've been in the mental hospital. And it's also 27 years since I've been raped. So all that is a plus to me because certain behaviors and certain consequences fall out as we change our lives, and if you had asked me, I just thought I was an unlucky person. I didn't know that part of my thinking was affecting my actions, and my actions became my behaviors, and then that became my personality if acted on long enough. And there are natural consequences that I get to make the decision for the behavior, but the other people give me my consequences.
Was there any issues with either depression or alcoholism in your family?
Yes, I come from a long history of people with mental illness that runs in our family. And so I know that I also, with all of the other things that's wrong with me, I have a social awkwardness that to me can be put maybe a little autistic.
Okay.
But I've just been socialized out of it, and now I am willing to take more risks. I'm a risk taker in my life, and I like having new adventures and wondering where this rabbit hole is going to where is it going to end, or where am I going to show up? What's going to show up next? So I have that. Yes, I do come from a long line of people and a long line of people who were mostly alcoholic and had horrible trauma, survived that without being able to talk about it. My mother was married before she had my brother and I, and her husband was thrown out of a second-story window and killed at a house of ill repute, which would be my older sibling's father, and it was never investigated. It's never talked about in our family. And so I'm just wondering how my mother, a widow with 4 children, then she's pregnant with me. I'm number 5 of 6. How she dealt with all of that, being a Black woman in Kentucky.
Right.
And my sister said, in her entire lifetime, and my mother died when I think she was 72. She didn't raise us. We were put up for adoption. My sister doesn't remember her laughing ever. And so to me, that's undiagnosed depression, which she treated with church.
How old were you when you were put up for adoption? I don't think I ever knew that.
8 or 9, something like that.
Okay.
I still remember the day that we had to go before the judge.
Why do you think so many African Americans go without treatment or are scared to get treatment? What do you think is our fear?
I think it's a little bit of pride. And I think that it's the pride, the kind of pride that this tradition, because you have to look at our time in this land. So coming as slaves, you didn't get treatment. You didn't get the best treatment. You weren't taught to nurture yourself. It was definitely not encouraged. So I think that there is like that tradition. There's also this self-pride of what will people think, and it's really basically boils down to what do I think? What about that stigma? What do I think about people who have a mental illness? And so if I become the monster, see, that's what recovery teaches you, is that I am the problem. The problem can't be you, because if the problem is outside of me, then there's no solution. Okay, so I have to be the problem. And so the 12-step recovery works on the individual, and so I get to come face to face with all my old ideas and my old belief systems and what's currently going on with that, and should I act on it? African Americans, I think that collectively that we suffer from trauma, if you look like, or systematically or institutional, however you want to put that, like as a race because of what was done. And I think that it all plays into our resistance to self-care, our resistance to nurture. And see, all of that is life-giving. And so sometimes for me, it goes back to the pride of, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. But as African Americans, we look at all the churches we have. And so to me, the Creator is in the creation business, 24/7 times infinity. So I don't know much about math, but that's pretty high. And if I am on the Creator's side, if I am indeed of the Creator, see, somehow I got the misinformation that I was not. And it's up to me to check myself and say, oh, yes, I am. Okay. And I don't know, like my brother is a minister, so I see that there's lots of good work that's being done in our communities. But where I see he has an undiagnosed mental disorder. He treats with church, which means that it's manageable. But if he were able to ask and receive professional help, maybe new vistas would open up.
So one thing I wanted to make sure I touched on, because we're kind of touching on it now, is this convergence of mental health diagnosis, substance abuse, and being a Black woman. I mean, there's four things in that, right? Because you're Black and you're a woman. So it's and when we talk about identity, I imagine it's we do you pull all that in, or do you separate it? Do you feel like, you know, part of it is not my identity, it's just a fact, or how do you deal with that as far as like your identity?
I think I come from a place where I was all separate because it was not safe to have all of Emma to emerge at once. But I think through this 12-step process and my recovery, there's been a recreation and a forming of a totally powerful Emma, okay, who happens to be a woman, who happens to be African American and proud to be it, and who happens to be a person living with a mental illness, and so and happens to be in recovery from a substance abuse disorder. So all of that is to say, I'm huge beyond belief. To say that I'm this, whatever you think of me, you know, because most people, I don't look like much. I'm old, I got glasses, I got dreadlocks, but I've flown a plane. I've landed a plane. When I was a firefighter, I recoiled from a 6-story building upside down and then turned right side up and lived through that. I mean, I've done some things in my life. You know, I've traveled. You probably wouldn't know that unless you had the time to hear my story. But you would have to look through the lens that our country has put on you and your personal lens.
Right.
To even make the time.
And that, you know, that's one thing that has always been fascinating. I don't know if fascinating is the right word, but people who go through the 12-step program or people who have recovered from addiction are extremely honest, right? Like to a point of being painful, but that's actually a part of the process. It's there's no political correctness in it.
No.
There's no mincing words. An example. So we have person-centered speaking now, right? So we don't call somebody a schizophrenic anymore. We says that is a man that happens to have schizophrenia. But in the addiction world, you still say, no, I'm an addict. Like, and I remember having arguments in an agency that you were also a part of, because the agency was trying to force the addict, people with an addiction to not say that. And they're like, no, but we have to own that because it's part of our recovery. So lastly, can you speak a little bit to, have you always been this, because you're an extremely honest and blunt person, was that always your personality? Did your journey through recovery bring that out in you, or was it both? Like you were always like that and this just accentuated it?
I wasn't, if you listen to my story, because it wasn't always okay to tell the truth in my family. And I came from a family of looking good. And as we do the work, we find out that most of us came from that we want to project better than what we really are. And so I also said that I was addicted to fantasy long before I picked up a drink or a drug or I had a mental disorder. But I believe that my first mental inkling came out in kindergarten. Like I was suicidal. I've always wanted to die because I've never thought that I was of this world. And I had nobody safe to discuss those things with. And I had nobody safe to talk about the otherworldly things that were happening to me. And so I didn't have anybody safe. My father, I was attached to him. I didn't bond well with people. I bonded with my father, but my father would be away during the week and would come home on the weekend. So he actually worked in St. Louis. And so we stayed in Southern Illinois, and he went to work in St. Louis. And so I was left with my adoptive mother, and I found out many years later, was cruel to me. But I grew up with that message being love.
Yes.
Okay. So this is deep stuff and hard to talk about. And so I am a liar. I had to learn to lie to exist. And see, the disease of addiction is a lie. So the truth is the only healing force that people like us have. We have the healing force of the truth, and we have the healing force of our relationship with our Creator, or our higher power, however you wish to call that. And by nature, I'm a liar. And I have learned to tell the truth, because I would rather face one horrible truth than 1,000 pretty lies. One horrible truth.
So I would say I learned a lot about you today. I've known you for some time, and I've learned a lot about you today. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned is I've always known that you were special. You don't like hearing that, I know, but you are a special person. You're one of the most insightful, honest, articulate, wise people that I've ever met. And I think when you look at your journey and you see that you had one moment after your first treatment, it's almost unheard of, Emma. I mean, you just have to know that there's, but I think that part of you that's so honest and so, I know you had to get there, but once you got there, I think that's who you are as a person. And it really has helped you on your journey. You know what I mean? Because it's yeah. Well, I'm very lucky to have heard you and watched you work with people.
Well, your vision of me and my vision of me are totally opposite, and I think I speak total gibberish. Okay. But really, I like being me. I like being a little off center and a little quirky, and I'm shy, but I'm attracted to people, so I'm gonna be, and I'm nosy. Oh my God. I can't help it. Yeah. I can't help myself. This is it. So it's what you get. And, maybe in my next lifetime, it can be different. I could be more polished like you, but this time it ain't it. It's not it.
You're as polished as you need to be. You are perfectly polished. But I just wanted to thank you for taking the time with sharing. And I think a lot of people will get a lot out of what you said. And I think that I heard from your husband that you have a speaking engagement coming up. And I think you need to speak as much as possible because you have a lot of wisdom and you connect. On the next episode of The Landscape, we will have a conversation with Debbie Becker, Senior Research Associate at the Individual Placement and Support Employment Center, which is an evidence-based method of supported employment for individuals with serious mental illness. We will speak about the research, method, and IPS learning community which spans 7 countries. Make sure to tune in, as this method also has strategies that transcend populations and abilities. See you then.